rate to about 23, I think, percent in October of 2022. All of this together has increased poverty levels in Nigeria. Nigeria was named poverty capital in the world, with more than 43% of Nigerians living below the poverty line in 2022. India, more populous country than Nigeria, has now overtaken Nigeria. Of course, as we know, JAPA itself and immigration rates, Nigerians relocate at the slightest opportunity. Passport issuance is now at 38%. High employment rate is now about 33%. What does this mean? For you, for your company, and for me, individually and collectively? This, of course, means that 2023, from all indication, is going to be a bumpy year. It's our election year, which means that government spending is not expected to immediately shore up the deficits that we see. And it's safe to say that this will be a strategy session to help you get ready for 2023. The discussants that we've brought, and we'd like to thank all of our speakers who are experts in their field, are going to be discussing what you should be doing. In the face of all of these realities, what should you be doing? How should you be maximizing your limited resources? Without further ado, I'm very pleased to welcome, of course, I'd always start with ladies. We are very, very happy to welcome our speakers. Rena, forgive me if I don't pronounce your last name properly. And once I finish, please help me. It's Rena Osiemi. Did I pronounce it well, Rena?
Yes, perfect.
Oh, thank you. I'm particularly pleased that I did. And Secretary, can you please help me project? I'm struggling right now to project her, to get her on the screen. Yes, thank you. Okay, so Rena is the Chief Operating Officer for Zimvest, a digital wealth management firm, and that's a subsidiary of Zcrest. She's a certified investment and wealth management professional with over 14 years of experience in business development, strategy, product management, and solutions development. She has cognate experience in entrepreneurship. That's an interesting one, Rena. You have to tell us what that's about. Evidenced by her valuable contributions in 5 new businesses over the course of her career. Well done, Rena. She started her professional career as a relationship officer at Access Bank in 2008. And after 5 years at the bank, she joined AXA Masset as unit head business development and later rose to position of head solutions development, where she's responsible for driving skill and business growth. Thank you, Rena. She moved from being a microbiologist. She's an alumnus of the Lagos Business School, and right now in her personal life, she's an ardent tech enthusiast and is deeply involved and interested in VR, AR, metaverse. Interesting, Rena. I can't wait. Okay, so let's go on to the next speaker. Welcome, Rena. Hand clap for Rena, please.
Thank you so much, Adiola. Thank you very much.
Can we move to the next person so I can just introduce all of them? Thank you. Jimmy, forgive me. Jimmy Ogbobine. Am I correct? Okay.
You're correct.
Thank you, Jimmy. Jimmy is head of consulting at Agosto & Co. Consulting, and he also heads the research of Agosto & Co. Jimmy created the framework for these days BGL Index, Nigeria's premier independent equity market index, established by a leading investment bank and newspaper publication. He also initiated coverage notes on banks and cement companies while he was in the research and strategy unit of BGL PLC. He joined Consolidated Discounts Limited in October 2021. And over the years, he's been involved in various pioneering work and helped management achieve goals and targets. And he's a regular contributor to This Day and Business Day, and also speaks on CNBC and Channels TV. Jimmy has attended financial courses at Euromoney School of Finance, West African Capital Market School, and volunteers as a mentor for youth seeking new career goals and opportunities. He's a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria and graduate of accounting of Yaba College of Technology. He's also an alumnus of Lagos Business School and so of the Senior Management Program. Welcome, Jimmy. Can we go on to the next participant? Thank you. Sorry, next panelist. Bonju Fakaye. I'm sure I pronounced that one right, Bonju. Thank you.
Yes, you did.
Thank you. Bonju is currently VP Strategy and Transformation at FBN Quest Limited. She's an experienced strategy and innovation professional with over 15 years experience leading transformation efforts across various functions in financial services. At her current role, she's the Vice President of Strategy. She's responsible for formulation, articulation, and execution of strategy for Asset and Wealth Management Division. She began her career in investment banking in the UK, working for Barclays Capital and Goldman Sachs. She has an MBA with distinction from Cass Business School in the UK and a BSc in Business Economics from the University of Leicester. She's passionate about analyzing and solving problems. So Bonju is going to be solving some problems for us, some financial problems for us, to create better and sustainable structures that inspire and motivate others. Welcome, 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 welcome. Next person, please. Thank you, Moyo. I see you encouraging me. Thank you. Moyo Sore Awokweba is a group head financial planning and analysis at Tangerine Africa. She is a financial business partner expert and a fashion entrepreneur with over a decade experience navigating various sectors, insurance, big data and analytics, management consulting, and fashion across Africa. She's group head financial planning and analysis at Tangerine Africa, empowering people and businesses across Africa to lead financial secure lives through world-class insurance and pension solutions. She's also the founder and creative director of Emotives by Moyo, an Afrocentric fashion brand offering the best in textile and ready-to-wear clothing. She's also an alumnus of Lagos Business School and a level 2 candidate of the CFA Institute and a student member of ACCA. She's a business finance facilitator at the IPC Academy for Event Planners. So welcome all of our...
Thank you.
Thank you to all of you. So the first general question, we're going to get straight to it. I'm really intrigued. So if I'm going to be succeeding in my, this is not in the script. If I'm going to be succeeding in 2023, do I need to enroll at Lagos Business School? Because it looks like Bonju, you're like the only person here that is not from Lagos Business School.
I work there, so
I mean. Okay. So
aren't we missing one person? I think there's someone from Lotus Capital, Adiola.
Apologies. Yeah. I'm so sorry, Moshood Babatunde. Can we have Moshood? Thank you so much. I got so excited. Moshood is still smiling. Thank you. You're very kind. Moshood is Group Finance Director at Lotus Capital Limited. He has over 15 years of financial and management experience in the financial sector and the capital markets. Okay, so we'll learn about shares. His areas of specialty include corporate strategies, financial advisory, investment portfolio management, treasury management, business restructuring, interesting, audit and tax management, financial performance measurement, enterprise risk management, and business analytics. Who wants me to offend Moshood? Please, can we go back to Moshood? I haven't finished with Moshood, please. Thank you. In fact, I'm going to leave Moshood here, please. At Lotus, he's responsible for overall medium to long-term, corporate business and financial strategies. He has successfully developed and implemented various strategy turnaround innovative projects, which position Lotus Capital as a market leader and a one-stop financial supermarket. Moshood has previously worked with Axis Bank and McCoy Zalm Nigeria Limited. He is a fellow chartered accountant. He holds an MBA, and he's an alumnus of, you guessed it right, Lagos Business School and the University of Lagos. Okay, so welcome everybody. Welcome. Hand clap for all of you. And thank you so much. So maybe Moshood will just spend 1 second to just answer me. So do I need to get ready for 2023? Do I need to register with Lagos Business School?
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here. I think it will be a good idea to be a member and alumnus of Lagos Business School, since, as you can see, all of us here, alumnus, is a good, is my
good
view.
school. I agree. I agree. Reading all of your profiles, I completely agree. Thank you and welcome everybody. And so for everyone joining the team, joining the panel today, welcome. And just so that we know who is who, can you please change your display name to your real name if you haven't done that already? Just so that we don't mistakenly call you Mommy Tope when you want to be known as Adiola Olumeyo, for example. And please keep your microphones muted when you're not speaking so that we don't get noise like my phone just did now when we're listening to all of these fantastic tips from all of the panelists. And we want this to be participatory. So please use your raise hand function if you have questions, or type it out. I'll be looking out for those and I'll be putting all of those together to ask the panelists. If there's any person that you want to answer in particular, you can also say this is directed to this person and I'll have them answer that. We're recording this session so that you can reference to it later. This is for the whole 2023. So, I mean, I know all of us would want to go back because one thing or the other you'd like to remember to get yourself ready. So going straight into it, Bonjo, from a global economic viewpoint, what should we expect for 2023?
Thank you, Deola. And it's really good to be here and nice to meet all the other panelists as well. So Deola, I think, in your intro, you covered a lot of the grim of what 2022 has been. And, looking ahead to 2023, sorry to bring the bad news that I don't think much of that is changing, okay? So, I mean, there are a lot of indicators to kind of watch out for. Let me start by, just reminding us that there has been a pandemic in the recent past, right? And the global economy was sort of just kind of emerging from that before 2022 hit. And we had the Ukraine-Russia conflict, which just threw supply chain shocks and basically unsettled the world. And what we've seen this year, and I believe will continue into next year, is high inflation, rising inflation. And so globally, I don't see that is really on a stopping train, maybe except for the US, which seems to have surprised everyone recently and, sort of maybe peak at its inflation. But rising inflation usually just means, rising interest rates, which we've seen this year as well. And I believe will continue into next year. Central banks have to increase the interest rates to just kind of curb demand and try to, stabilize and bring everything into sort of equilibrium. So with that, you will also expect that unemployment will also rise. We've seen in the tech sector that there have been a lot of layoffs recently. In the US, even I think it's about 85,000 layoffs. In Nigeria, as recently as a couple of days ago, I think Chipakash mentioned, some layoffs. So in the tech sector, we've seen a lot of unemployment, or a lot of job cuts. And that is really a lagging indicator. We think that will still show us later on next year that we are very much in a recession next year. We are in a stagflationary environment, in the sense that as I explained, the inflation continues to rise. And if I want to talk about some of our global economies, I've mentioned the US, and I said the Fed seem to, they've had a hawkish stance in the past. They've been prepared to do anything in terms of, rising interest rates to manage their economy. Since their economy seems to, manufacturing has bounced back, we saw that this week in the US very slightly. But I think that the unemployment aspect might still play out, because what it's basically telling us about the US is that they haven't restructured much. Apart from the tech industry, corporates have not restructured much to sort of temper what is happening globally. They might be okay, but the rest of the world, the UK, for example, where we've seen energy prices push inflation up. You have to, and they've had Brexit, so they've lost a lot of people in the UK, job-wise. And so you just expect that in the UK, you will see that unemployment will continue to rise. You will see that prices will continue to rise. You will see that the Bank of England, and they've indicated that next week they might increase interest rates again by about another 0.5%, right? So I don't see any global economy really kind of spending their way out of this. They have to make the realistic decision to make the necessary cuts where possible. That's in terms of companies, sectors managing what's happening. Corporates have to restructure. There's no other way. Individuals have to kind of review how they want to approach 2023. We've seen in China, for example, because they had a resurgence of COVID, they've had to have like a complete lockdown. And we've seen what that has done to their economy recently. Now, there are indications that China might reopen, sooner than what we expected. But again, restarting that economy is going to take time. So what am I basically saying? I'm saying that 2023 is going to be very harsh. The reality is that central banks have to do what they're doing to curb the inflation rates. As long as the Russia-Ukraine conflict remains, we expect that we'll still see, supply chain shocks have sort of eased, but we expect that, provided that, the general political environment does not significantly change. So tensions between the US and China, for example, provided that there are no real surprises there, the trends that we're seeing now are continuing, at least for the first part of 2023. Maybe later in 2023, you might see that things begin to improve and central banks might feel comfortable to start cutting interest rates and see more expansionary policies to drive, the economic growth. But the truth is that the global economy will shrink. It has to. And with that, there will be some harsh realities in terms of what people and companies will be facing next year. So I don't think that we are seeing a real let-up of the harsh realities of 2022 or the challenges of 2022. And I do honestly think that the sooner the realities are embraced and addressed, whether it is on the government policy level or on the corporate level or the individual level, the sooner that all of that happens, then the sooner we can emerge from this. But as it is, 2023 is looking pretty grim, unfortunately. Sorry.
Thank you, Bonjour, for delivering such grim news.
I would like to say my pleasure, but it really isn't.
So, Jimmy, do you have a sliver of hope that you would offer to us, or do you align with her assessment?
Okay. Yes, it's quite obvious that in terms of the global transmission, what we will tend to see, we will tend to see a lot of risks from the global environment. you would all agree that COVID sort of pushed us into an apocalyptic scenario in terms of crisis. And shortly after that, we thought we had seen the worst. And Mr. Putin decided to visit some hostility to his neighbors, and was seeing the evidence of that as well. And we're possibly looking at a recession in some of the major economies. China is pursuing a COVID-0 strategy, which has an impact on global production. So that's what we'll be seeing from the global environment. And to just add a thing or two to what Bonjo had said earlier, for Africa, the world is, the investment community, the global investment community is quite apprehensive about Africa. Are we going to see defaults in 2023? Has Africa finally pushed itself to that unsustainable debt levels? If you're following the news closely, Ghana's party has ended, and all of so finally Nigerians can heave a sigh of relief that the endless pointers to Ghana, how right the Ghanaians are getting it, and how wrong we are getting it. I think finally we can heave, not like we like what's happening with them, but it just shows you that even when the debt crisis knocked on its doors in Africa, it was the poster boy of the continent that received this massive, that welcomed the angel of debt crisis, if I were to use that phrase. Of course, Zambia has also had its own crisis before now. So there are possibilities that a few African countries may face debt crisis, especially on the foreign portfolio debts. And what has happened in Ghana is even a bit scary, because they're talking about defaults or haircuts. So just to explain that, they're saying to debtors, if you owned about 100 Ghanaian cedi, or in debt portfolio, that's if the government of Ghana were owing you 100 Ghanaian cedi, then they would have to take a 30% haircut to that, which means what the government of Ghana is owing you is now less. And in economics, we've always argued that it's difficult for nations to default in their local currencies because the central banks have recourse to printing. But we're not talking about Ghana. Let's come back home a bit now. So for Nigeria, if we're to reel into Nigeria stories, then we'll just continue with the negative tales. And we have a lot of us to talk about. So I'll just leave that for another, we'll continue that discussion, but just to highlight on the question you said. For Nigeria, this is the upside. The upside is that a lot of the problems we are facing on the macroeconomic end, thankfully, can be corrected with the right policy framework. So we have the right policies in the mix, and we can actually be a good news story in these times of lots of bad news. So the question then becomes, do we have the political will to embark on these reforms? Okay. And if you permit me to just at least put some pointers to that question that I've also sort of raised now. We know we're embarking on an election in the first quarter of next year. And I just said that with our policy issues and the kinds of slow growth we're experiencing, a 2% growth rate, an average of about 2.5% in the last 7 to 8 years, which means that our population growth rate has outstripped our GDP growth rate. So on the average, as a country, our people are poorer because the economic growth rate is less than the population growth rate. So the average wallet, the wallet of the average Nigerian has basically shrunk over this period. Let's look at it from an aggregate perspective. But the good news is this. We got into this mess, or this morass, so to say, because of our policy inactions. And where we took policies, maybe policy missteps. And in some areas, we didn't even have policies to address these issues. Yes, we do recognize all of the global issues, but we can correct our narratives with the right policy framework. With the right policies, we can correct our narrative. Okay, Adiola.
Thank you, Jimmy. At least a little sliver to hold on to. And on a corporate level, I know that global supply chains have been affected, and Nigeria being largely a consumer country. And I'd like Moyo to weigh into this now. So if the Russian-Ukraine crisis persists, do you see this further stretching the global supply chains? And do you think it will hurt global economy further?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Adiola. And it's great to be here. To your question, I'll say yes. Reason being that as of June, the shipping costs were at grown as high as 60%. And there's been a huge strain on the supply chain. Bonjo had mentioned earlier some of the impacts of the Russian-Ukraine crisis on the global economy. Talk about the global inflation rates rising, talk about global inflation rates rising, talk about all of the economic indices basically not looking good. And that we can imagine will continue and persist into 2023. There's been speculation of a lot of countries going into recession next year. And then there's been an estimated cost of about 2.8 trillion loss as a result of the crisis and the war, right? And that will only further, put a strain on the economy and as a result, the global supply chain as well, in terms of cost of exporting, cost of shipping, and all of that across countries. So it's safe to assume that it will an extended timeline of this war will definitely affect the global economy at large. Thank you.
Okay. You've all given us a very solemn, thought-provoking. I like the approach that, this is something that we have to look at seriously and start to prepare for, and which is why we're having this conversation. Between Bonjo and Jimmy and Moyosora, you've also mentioned to us, that look, all over, this is something that is experienced across countries. It's not limited to Africa, but hopefully, and the economy itself needs to pick up. Jimmy's told us, we just need to kick ourselves in the behind, and we just might be able to sail through this. Rena, do you think there might be a global recession in 2023?
I know, it's interesting that we're all smiling when we're making grim statements. Bonjo had already mentioned.
That's what I said to Bonjo. She delivered it with a smile.
With a smile. That's what can we do? I really wish the answer to that was a strong no, but Bonjo had already, alluded to that. We're seeing global growth slowing sharply. There's a lot of that's been driven by like insecurity and instability globally, an extended period of that, if I may add. There's the Ukrainian-Russia war, which everyone knows about, which, has driven commodity prices up. Food and energy, costs have gone up, driving inflation. There is, so there's still some aftermath effects of COVID because, there were stimulus packages that was pumped into the economy and, that has an inflationary effect, right? And so we've seen a lot of central banks try to curb or manage inflation by the rate hikes, right? All of that, a recession is when we have an extensive decline in economic activity and you would technically speaking, you'll see that 2 consecutive quarters have a decline in GDP, which is a measure of economic activity, right? And you would see that in a recession, there is low productivity or economic activity, there is low consumer demand, there's high unemployment, and we're already seeing all of these things. So definitely a global recession is on the horizon, is definitely going to happen. I mean, we are very careful to say definitely because we don't see anything that's going to change that, right? And if you look at reports from like the World Bank presidents, economists, analysts, across the world, everyone reaching that consensus. So yeah, definitely, probably highly likely we will see a global recession happening in 2023, and I'm delivering that with a smile as well. This is very grim news. Atila?
Okay, I'd let Moshood decide if he would continue with a smile. So we've heard that very likely there'll be a highly likely, I'm trying to use the same words that Rena used, there'll be a global recession. For us, Nigeria, if you were to advise on the national macroeconomic viewpoint, what do you think we should expect, Moshood, in 2023?
Okay, thank you, Adiola. I think it's a very interesting point to look at what is going to happen to average Nigeria and the Nigeria economy in 2023. 2023 is going to be a very eventful year for Nigeria, and not only Nigeria. I think generally for the world. If you look at it from the political point of view, in 2023, Nigeria will go to the poll to elect a new set of leaders. That will happen in the first quarter of the year. As we are all aware that whenever this transition program, you tend to see a cautionary approach from the investor and even the economy, because people will tend to approach all the economic decision from the point of safety, where the liquidity will be the king. The same year, we're also going to have a change in the administration, which will mark almost the end of first half year. That means that the very first half year is the focus will be on the political transition. And when there is a focus on political transition, we have to be very mindful that Nigeria economy is being managed from the point of view of fiscal policy and the monetary policy. I think if you look at it from the monetary policy and taking a clue from what happened in 2022, inflation was around 21% as at October. If you recall, in January, it was about 15%. And going into 2023, with other macroeconomic issues that we are dealing with, looking at it from the foreign exchange and some other things, it's expected that the inflation will still continue, most especially for the first half of the year. It's expected that maybe by the time we are getting to the second half of the year, there might be some moderation. And according to the World Bank projection, it's going to be about 17%. And talking about the monetary policy, whenever there is an inflation, it's a responsibility of CBN to step in, because it's one of the mandates that CBN has to ensure that inflation is managed, the stability and the value of our currency is also maintained. If we follow what CBN approach is in 2022, it has been a very hawkish approach to stem down the rate of inflation. We expect this to continue, and as we are going into 2023, I think the right expectation is that CBN continue to manage the inflation using different monetary policy, including NPR. NPR has been raised like 3 or 4 times this year from 11%, and I think it's currently about 16.5%. So it's expected that this will continue. And if we move away from the inflation, we also need to consider one other major macroeconomic factor that affects major economic decision we do in Nigeria. That is on our currency, the value of the naira. In 2022, we knew how naira has moved from what it was sometime in January to about 444 in recent time at the official window. At the parallel window, it's almost like a 735 or 40 this week. It has touched about 900 in the last few weeks. So why do we have this? I think we can attribute it to a mismatch of demand and supply. Demand and supply of the effects. Part of the demand is because we are import dependent, and that hasn't changed, and it's not also expected that it will change in 2023. The impact of these rise or stable demand in effects is that the inflation, we are importing inflation because the supply chain across the globe is already disrupted. And as long as our currency is weak, we are importing inflation. And on the side of the supply as well, we know that most of our remittances that we get from the oil revenue has been likely impaired due to oil theft and the rest. In the recent time, we've seen some measures from the federal government in curtailing this. We expect that it will continue in 2023. We also feel that there will be an increase in the oil production. All of these, in addition to structural measure from the security point of view, we believe the supply will improve. But one of the things I also think from the monetary point of view, monetary policy point of view, will happen is attempt by Central Bank of Nigeria to unify the exchange rate. And if this is done, it's expected there will be a stability. And in terms of even projecting what the value of naira is, it cannot come, it will come definitely with its own price, because the intrinsic value of the naira will reflect by the tactical devaluation. But the good news here is that the difference between the official window and the parallel will be narrowed. We also need to talk about the economic growth. In 2023, I think I do not see recession, but I think a slow growth in the economy. We are looking at 3.2% in 2022. We expect that 2023, under normal circumstances, should be better than 2022, but it's not really looking like that. Based on the projection, I think it's looking at about 3%. We know what this means. It's a tough time ahead, and the business environment is already gearing up for that. I must also mention the budget, the government fiscal plan for 2023. We already have about 20 trillion budget, but we also have to note that about half of this, which is 50% of about 10 trillion, is going to be borrowed. That means we're having a deficit budget. When we have a deficit budget, the idea is to stimulate the economy, but we should not also take our eyes off the borrowing. So meaning that the government will come to the market, capital markets generally, to come and borrow. And looking at the projecting federal government, there's going to be more local borrowing than the Eurobond. For the business in the capital market, it's expected that there might be crowding out of financing from the federal government. Many fund managers and the investor might tend to move towards fixed income instruments. Most especially, I mentioned, is going to be a year of transition because many people would like to turn on the side of caution, on the side of liquidity. So we expect that there might be a slight increase or a relative stability of what we are experiencing in the yield of the fixed income instrument in 2023. We should also note that there might be a shift in the economic policy because of the change in administration. When that will happen, we might likely see that in second half of the year, which might focus, continuation of the massive investment in infrastructure, which is expected to create relative employment, to address some social issues in terms of making it easier to address the cost of rise and the cost of living, because inflation is already dealing. I must also mention that 2023, based on the federal government plan, there might be a removal of subsidy. Oil subsidy has been a very controversial point in the national discourse. But federal government has made us to understand that definitely come in July, there might be a removal of subsidy. Well, it's a double-edged sword, in my own opinion. The reason why there is a clamor for the removal of subsidy is also to plug the leakage and to plow back all these savings into the investment in infrastructure. But we must also know, so that we also prepare ahead, that the removal of subsidy means immediate and direct impact on the price of commodities. So it's expected that inflation will go up. Maybe temporary, not long term, maybe short term to medium term, but it will have an immediate impact on the inflation. And when this happens, we tend to see increase in cost of running businesses and personal finances. So the idea thing is also to brace up. When you say brace up for the impact, so the impact of the oil subsidy removal is imminent if it is eventually removed. But we also expect a kind of support from federal government when all these savings are reinvested into the infrastructure and some other structural adjustment that might be made to also ensure that the impact is not far-fetched. The fiscal policy, I think that it's not, I do not expect a major change in the fiscal policy. We've been told that there might be some implementation of new taxes, telecom and the benefit taxes. I think that should happen sometimes in January. And for the supply chain along that sector, it's also expected that there might be some adjustment in pricing. So we must also expect that.
Thank you, Moshood.
If I can put it at that level. Thank you so much, Adela.
Thank you very much. You've said a lot of thought-provoking things, saying that we're importing inflation is a big hit, but I think, from all indication, that's just the truth. And it's good that you also mentioned to us, about the impact of the subsidy removal. That hasn't been removed, but we feel it already. And businesses feel it, and there's the direct hit. It's good to know that there might be changes second half. And interestingly, you seem to disagree with most of the other speakers. In your opinion, and you don't think that there will be a recession. In fact, you're predicting that there might be growth, albeit slow. Bonju, do you agree with the assessment?
So I think, Deola, you touched on a lot of the things that I found interesting about Moshood's contribution. And to a large extent, I agree with most of what he said. So let me start with the monetary policy side of things. Absolutely 100% in agreement. There is no other way. The CBN is going to continue to respond in a hawkish manner to the rise in inflation. So MPR will continue to increase. CRR CRR is currently, they increased it recently from 27.5 to 32.5. So liquidity in the system is very tight already as it is. And the CBN will continue to be happy to do that to curb inflation as much as possible. The new directive that came out this week on the limitations of withdrawals and all of that, personally, for me, I think it's a good move, right? What it does for us, basically, obviously they're reprinting the Naira, so they need to take out of circulation the older notes. But aside from that, what this does is just improve transparency. And where there's transparency, there's accountability in terms of movement of funds. In terms of the implementation of that as well, I think, if it's done on a BVN level, it can be. If it's not an individual account level, I could just go and open accounts, in multiple banks and get my 20K a week from 3-5 different banks, but not to miss the point. On the monetary policy, completely in agreement. On the fiscal policy as well, I mean, the fact that we are intending to borrow, I don't know if it's 165% or something ridiculous of the budget for 2023 is absolutely, I mean, it just lets you know the kind of dire straits that we are in. And like Mushood said, it's to really try and stimulate the economy. And maybe that's what's informing your optimism for more of a slow growth versus an outright recession. For me, I think that, a lot of what will happen next year for Nigeria is also, on the other thread that Mushood touched on, is also what will happen in terms of the political landscape. The populace have to select somebody who they believe can address the issues, like Jimmy mentioned, and make the policy reforms that need to be made so that on a macroeconomic level, we can correct some of the things that need to be corrected. Fuel subsidy, absolutely. The reality is that we cannot continue as a nation to, subsidize petrol, diesel the way that we have been. So how are they going to address that? Ways and means borrowing. How do we sort of start looking at that for the government to finance the government? Because a lot of what has been happening this year in terms of short-term borrowing for the government has been ways and means. So do we look at something like maybe securitization of ways and means borrowing for the government? Okay, we have to also just consider where we need to be a bit more deliberate and bold in making the right macroeconomic policy reforms. So I think a lot of panelists have said the things that we need to consider for Nigeria next year. I think Moshood's analysis is very good. I still think a recession is imminent, but I think we can agree to disagree on that. And I think to Jimmy's points as well, when he touched on Nigeria, I think policy reform is absolutely critical to making sure that 2023 does not hit as badly, and that it really depends on the politics. So yeah, I mean, that would be my take on what we can expect from next year.
I certainly hope that whoever is taking the reins of power will be bold, as you've suggested, and deliberate. Thank you very much. It's good to have a good balance of opinions on the table. And I still haven't made up my mind who I'm swinging with. So whilst we're all chewing on the opinion we have on the table and the different ways of looking at it, I'd like Jimmy to weigh in. And for all my panelists, just to say that, I'm going to be asking that our responses are shorter now because there's so many questions to ask you. So please, let's engage with everyone on the chat room and say more there on the chat room. But I'm going to be asking that we speed it up so I have a lot more. So Jimmy, from what Mushood said, and also from Bonjo, Moshood's opinion is that there will be slow growth, not a recession. Now, he's also mentioned that IMF has also projected that the Nigerian's economy would actually grow to about 3% in 2023. Although our inflation rates would also drop to about 17%. If this happens, how will this impact me, impact you, impact everyone listening? And how does this affect our companies?
Okay, I'd just like to say that it's very difficult to predict the future, and it's very difficult to say how things will play out tomorrow. And if we want to test how difficult it is to predict the future, let's take our minds back to this time, 2019. Who did see coronavirus? And even as early as February, the first week in February 2020, who saw how long the world would be under a lockdown, unknown to an entire generation. The generation that did see the World War said they had never seen a thing like this. So we must admit how difficult it is to predict the future. Would there be a recession? Would there not be a recession? So what can we do? Because you've also asked a question around corporate planning and even personal finance management. What can we do under these circumstances where we do admit the limitations of analysts to predict outcomes or the future? I think the first thing we can do is to look at scenarios, to first admit that it's difficult to predict outcomes and hinge our prognosis on scenarios. And I think it will be fair to also look at scenarios from at least 2, 3 for corporate planning. So what I'm doing right now is combining 2 questions in one, looking at macro outcomes, possible macro outcomes, and corporate planning as well. So will there be a recession or not? We do not know, but we know what may lead to a recession, and we also know what may lead to high growth. We also know what may lead to the kind of stagnant growth we have seen, the 2 to 3% levels. So what that means is this: what could lead us to a high growth scenario? Like I said earlier, the government needs to reform. So first, how do we think about these scenarios? The first question we should ask ourselves is, will the Nigerian government embark on policy reforms in 2023? And then secondly, we ask ourselves that if they do embark on reforms, which policy reforms will they embark on? And then thirdly, we can ask ourselves that how far will they go on these key reforms? And if you can add a fourth question, it will then be the key issues we need to reform. So what are the key issues we need to reform as a country? We need to talk about the subsidies on petrol, that energy space. We need to look at the subsidies on petrol, the electricity tariffs. That's it in energy. And then outside that, we need to say to ourselves that what's the FX strategy of the Central Bank of Nigeria? Because the FX strategy has a consequence on price, has a consequence on inflation. And then we also need to ask ourselves that what's the infrastructural management strategy of the government in 2023? Now, the other issues like security and all of that, so we need to also talk about security reforms. But we also need to know that 2023 is a transition year. The current government, which has adopted an inertia approach to reforms, will stay till about 5 months in the new year. And the fiscal plan of the government, which is the budget of the government, will take us all through the year. So it will take the new government some bit of time to settle, and then before, if they have to come up with a new budget, we do not know. But in terms of corporate planning, what can we begin to think around? I just dropped a rough sketch of scenarios. So for corporate planning, we must adopt scenarios in our planning to say that, are we in a high growth macro scenario, which is what I said, that if we reform the subsidy space, electricity tariffs, FX strategy of the central bank, infrastructure space, it could take us to a high growth scenario with growth upwards of around 7%. If we maintain the status quo, which is where things are today, we could see growth levels around where things are today. And if we get worse on where we are today, say for instance, we increase the subsidies on petrol, we increase the electricity tariffs on, we continue with the kind of electricity tariff regime we have today, where operators are not able to recover their cost of equity, and the central bank's demand management strategy continues, then it could take us into a recession. So it's one of these three, but we're not prophets here. So the question I'll then ask to come down to the question of corporate planning. First, we need to hinge our thoughts on these scenarios and ask ourselves at every point in time, where are we along these scenarios, firstly? And then to also note some things in monitoring the environment, we also have to keep our eyes on some key indicators. For instance, when we talk about the three prices of the economy, interest rates, exchange rates, inflation, interest rates are rising today, which means if you are a borrower, the interest rates are rising. So the question you need to ask yourself, even in your own personal finance space or as a corporate planner, is if interest rates are rising, why are interest rates rising? So just to explain the back end of the economics, the central bank is trying to reduce inflation, trying to tame inflation. So they are trying to mop up excess liquidity from the system. So they are giving investors an incentive to invest in the Naira, which is why interest rates are rising. But on the other end, it has a downside. And what's the downside? That your borrowing rates, if you're a corporate organization, a corporate planner, or even an individual thinking of being exposed to a Naira loan, the borrowing rate on that Naira loan is probably going to increase next year. So the question you have to ask yourself is, why am I borrowing? So that's one key price we need to look at, interest rates. The second key price we need to look at is exchange rates. We're seeing the kinds of volatilities in the FX markets. The question you need to ask yourself today is this. First, I'll drop this. The rates we are seeing at the parallel markets today are not the real rates of the Naira. The Naira is more valuable than what we are seeing. In other words, we're seeing the downside risks of undue and blind speculation on the Naira. So all these rates of 700, 800, and even 900, and all the people predicting the Naira is going to get to 1,000, on the basics of the fundamentals, the Naira can only get to 1,000 on blind speculation. So the question then becomes, if you do not have need for FX at these crazy rates in the market, as a corporate planner, you probably should not be panicking to buy FX at those rates. Because with the right policy mix, the Naira should be appreciating in the parallel markets and in the official market. So the question as a corporate planner is, why am I buying FX at these crazy rates? What do I really need it for? If you really do not need it for anything serious, then you shouldn't be speculating. If not, you take a beating because you probably do not even have the expertise for such speculation. So if, for instance, you bought the Naira at 900 or 850 when it was at those rates, today you're losing how much? Why do you want to lose at such times? And then thirdly, to talk about the third key price, inflation. Inflation
Jimmy,
is
can you tie that to what to expect as an individual also? So
okay.
that we can wrap this up. And there's a lot of things that you've mentioned. I'd like to ask Moyo a few things on that.
Okay, so in terms of as an individual, at times like this, your financial planning and your financial prudence needs to be stronger. So to go really granular, at times like these, you need personal budgets. Whether you are a small business owner as an entrepreneur, or you are a salary earner, or you're a student on pocket monies, you need a personal budget, yearly, quarterly, monthly, a budget tied to your incomes, whether as a business owner or as a salary earner. You need personal budgets so that before you embark on spending, you can actually see the full picture of what you have. And it's these personal budgets that can serve as a guide into saying to yourself that at this point, I probably can't afford this, or at this point, I should be going for alternative B, because things are hard, as it were, and it's not a Nigerian picture, it's a global picture. So all over the world, you're hearing of cost of living crisis. So these are times to say to yourself that I need to have a personal budget. And on your personal budget, you can then, and the personal budget is not all about spending. It's also about that takes care of things like investments. So you should be, in times like this, it's quite interesting because people say to themselves, I do not have enough money. And the advice is, this is when you should be investing. So your personal budget should guide you into the kinds of investment choices to make and the investment choices not to make. I think it's as important telling people the choices not to make now, because it's at times like these that these high interest investments tend to be quite lucrative and quite tempting. The Ponzi schemes of this world, the FX, all sorts of FX schemes that you have no expertise on, you have no knowledge on, you do not follow trades, and you're going to most likely lose money and lose relationships with those who lead you into these investments. So it's important that in a bid to make money now, we do not lose money. It's as important as that. Okay. Thank you. Let me just rest here now on this.
Yes, but while you're resting, I'd like you to keep your thoughts going on the chat box.
Okay.
I feel like there's a lot that is still in there that I want to draw out. And I really feel bad that I'm rationing the time for everybody. It's that we want to get everyone in and out and before we lose it, because everybody is saying such important things. And Moyo, honestly, when I listen to Jimmy and Monju and Moshood, I'm just thinking, what do you think will happen to the Naira in 2023? Mr. Demola, I see your hand, but once it's time for questions, I promise you I've written down your name. Your name will be the first one to call. But I have a lot of questions that I want to ask that will benefit everybody. So please, don't worry, I have your name down. I'll call you once we start asking questions. So, Moyo, what do you think will happen to our Naira in 2023? We did appreciate. I know the EFCC chairman says he thinks it will, but do you think it will weaken further?
Okay, thank you. So like you said, I also listened to him say that he will appreciate, and if I recall, his opinion of it appreciating is basically based on the redesign of the Naira and its impact on money supply and how that will help curb inflation. Now, is that necessarily right? Or, I mean, is that necessarily correct? I think it has some merit. I think that to some extent, it has its own impact on helping to curb inflation and money supply. Of course, we've seen CBN dole out several policies in recent times. We have the new, the most recent one, which has to do with daily amounts, that people can access from the banks, both on the individual side and on the corporate side. Now, I think that they're beyond just the money supply. There are other factors that can affect whether or not it will appreciate or depreciate going into 2023. There is the issue of government debt that is consistently rising, and how that would affect, how that would impact the FX rates, the balance of trade. Of course, inflation has its own place in the mix. Cash, again, is just 6% of money supply, right? And these policies are only affecting just the 6% of money supply. Now, I'm one of those who think that by the end of the year, dollar will reach 1,000 Naira. I'm actually one of those who believe that. But going into 2023, it's tough to say how things will play out. Like, we know that 2023 is an election year. The current administration, again, I think it was Moshood or Jimmy that had touched on the fact that the current administration still has like 5 months next year, and then even the new government has barely the second half of the year to make any real policy change. I think that it would appreciate on the grounds that, some of the suggestions that have been mentioned earlier are taken. Do I think we can see that happen next year? Absolutely not. And to that extent, I feel like there will still be further depreciation, at the very least in the first half of the year. And I think it will peak at that point. But going into the second half of 2023, there may be some kind of appreciation for the dollar. Now, again, currently, as of today, if I recall, the CBN rate is still 4.45, and that is not reflective of the true value of the naira, if we're being honest. Now, if the CBN is able to further devalue the naira, perhaps some of the pressures that we're seeing in the parallel markets might also be eased as the rates converge. But for now, I don't see that happening. And on the basis of that, I strongly still believe that at the very least in the first half of 2023, the naira will continue to depreciate, and then maybe towards the later end of the year, it will the tide will turn. Thank you.
Thank you, Moyo. It's getting grimmer now, but it's good that we're talking, and I'm glad to all of you. Thank you to all of you for giving us the grim news, but also what you think your strategies are for that. I know that listening to you saying dollar would further depreciate, I know that in Moshood's analysis, he had mentioned that, one of the things that would also drive this is if the fuel subsidy is removed. And he's also mentioned the impact that would have directly or indirectly on everyone. Now, everyone seems to agree that fuel subsidy is likely to happen. And I also think that it's likely to happen. And Rena, do you think, it might be next year? Or do you think that the new government might push it further to maybe 2024? And if it is removed in 2023, what impacts should we brace up for?
Okay. Let me start with what the deregulation. I mean, I think everyone agrees that it is good for the economy, right? Because the subsidy and the savings from the subsidy removal will be allocated to other parts of the economy, other sectors, education, infrastructure, and whatnot, right? But for that to happen, it will get, or if that happens, or when that happens, it will get really bad before it gets better. Like Moshood had alluded to, and I think Bonjo had said as well.
Do you think it will be next year? Or would it be pushed further?
I struggle to see how that'll be next year. You know why? Because if you think about the impact and the fact that we're in an election year, it will take a lot of political will, right, to do that. So the question is, who wants to be the bad guy? Is it the incumbent government, right? Do they want to do that before they go out or maybe be re-elected? Or is it a new president that then has to set up his cabinet, maybe somewhere May, June, we start to see what the policies are looking like, right? I don't know that it's going to be first on his agenda. And if it is, it's not going to be funny, you see? So I think that one, is it possible? Yes. But I personally think it's highly unlikely that it will happen in 2023. If it does, it will be much, much later down the line, later in the year. Right. I personally think it's highly unlikely. I think they'll kick the can down the road again, especially because of where we are, the fact that elections are here. And it will take a lot of political will for that to happen. And I don't see anyone that wants to be the bad guy at this point.
That's some hope to hold on to. And we hope that it doesn't happen. Because like you and Moshood have agreed, it will have direct hits on us. It's very sad news when you say that it will get very bad before it then gets better. And hopefully with all of the mix that we have, that don't seem to be working well, for all of us, I'm hoping that, like you've predicted, it will be further down the road and not 2023 to at least give us a breather. And for you, Bonju, because of your experience in wealth management, what should I do as an individual, and is everybody listening on the call and those who would listen later on, what should we be doing to manage our resources, and how should we be preparing for this doomsday scenario that has been painted right now? And please feel free to deliver it with a smile.
As always, Adela. I think Jimmy started it very well when he said, everybody needs to have a budget. But I think that's the place to start from. Know what is necessary for you to spend money on next year, and know what is a nice to have. So start from there, and then check that your income can actually cover what is necessary for you. If not, and even if it can, then you need to start thinking also about your investment options. Now, the truth is that because of the inflation rates, many investments returns are being eroded, okay, because inflation is higher than the rate of return on a lot of investment options. But it doesn't mean that investment is a bad thing. And I will start, sort of low-level basic what you can do. And I can see that Moshood has, Lotus Capital in the background. Jimmy has Augusto, very nice. I'm going to plug FBN Quest, guys. Okay, start with us. You can start with your mutual funds. Okay, mutual funds are probably the sort of basic entry for your investment, and there are different types of mutual funds. So you choose the one that suits you, from money market to equity funds to bond, fixed income, whatever it is. But again, you can choose a mutual fund to invest in. And the good thing about mutual funds, yes, the rates on mutual funds are not going to beat inflation, but it's compounded interest, right? So you're making money on top of whatever it is that you are earning in your fund consistently. So consider a mutual fund. Consider, inflation hedge sort of investments. And what do I mean by that? You mentioned in your opening comments, and I believe somebody else might have mentioned along the line, about Nigerians just upping and going. And a lot of Nigerians that are upping and going, guess what? They need cash quickly, and they are offloading a lot of assets, particularly real estate. You call that distress sales. So distress sales is particularly when you want to, it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong. It just means you need cash quickly, but always good to investigate. But again, distress sales, if you're a person that, favors real estate, it's a good time. Keep your eye out, look for good opportunities, good properties that you can invest in to earn a return. There are also real estate investment trusts. So if you cannot afford a huge property, there's real estate investment trusts that you can also look at, which kind of pull real estate assets together and you can earn from that. So again, still a form of investment. You can also look at commodities like gold. Right. Again, please, I want to stress that any sort of investment that you choose to participate in this is a very good time for you to have a financial planner or investment manager that can guide you in the right investment choices to make. It's not a time to throw away money. Okay. Going back to your budget, right? If you're the person that is sending children to school abroad, you need access to FX. Dollar investments are good for you. Moshood made a very good example, or maybe it was Jimmy, I can't remember. If you do not need dollar, there's no need for you to go out and look for the dollar, please. Do you know what I mean? What is also driving this parallel market sentiment is, just people just wanting to hoard the dollar for whatever reason. It's demand, right? But if you don't need the dollar, if you're not exposed to the dollar, you can invest in your naira, okay? If you want to hedge against the inflationary pressures or the value of the naira, then you can also invest in dollars. But the truth is that there are many investment options. Speak to a financial advisor, speak to somebody that knows what they're doing to make sure that you get the right advice. Even if it's a mutual fund you want to invest in, if you're investing towards a short-term goal, like you want to pay your rent or you want to pay school fees, there are the right investments to do that. If it's more long-term, there's equity sort of products that you can look at, like the stock market. Anybody that invests in the stock market is not expecting to get their money back tomorrow or in 3 months' time. It's a long-term game. But the truth is that whatever. Yeah, sorry, please go ahead, Deola.
I suppose this some of these things that you've mentioned are things that would also affect us as people working with organizations and thinking forward as well, or planning towards the end of the year for organizations. And please drop a little more of these thoughts on what we can do in the chat box.
Sure.
And once you put a link to first FBN Quest, we'll come back to you with an invoice for advertisements.
Please send the invoice to Jimmy and Moshood as well, because they're advertising silently.
Okay, so let me turn to you, Rena. Bonju's told us about individuals and what we should be doing. Jimmy's touched on that as well in his own admonition to us. So I'm sitting in the management boardroom and we're talking about planning for next year. What should I be contributing to that conversation from the perspective of a corporate organization? What should our approach be to expenditure and investment, which are the two key things that we've heard Jimmy and Bonju stress on? And what should be our approach? Because of course, the resources are quite limited, and as you've all predicted, will continue to be in 2023. And just give us three key things that you think we should be doing. Yes.
I think Moshood, or was it Jimmy, that already talked about your loans, right? Because rates are going to go up. It means it will impact your business loans as well. So do you really need that loan? Do you need to restructure? Do you need to pay down now? Because it gets more expensive. Demand, because consumer demand is expected to be lower, and that also is going to thin out your margins. So do you want to, what can you explore through your entire value chain and see where you can build efficiencies to become like more competitive or have a competitive advantage? And you're going to face FX risks as well. I think Jimmy had mentioned that, right? So if you're going to be hit by FX directly, say you're an importer, this would be a good time to front load your cost, meaning you can make purchases now, because if you expect that rates or prices are going to go higher, then if you lock down at a lower rate, it gives you a wiggle room to stay more competitive, right? Have a competitive advantage, maybe on price, or even boost your should I say margins, right? This is also the time, like I've spoken about, becoming more efficient, and just looking through your internal processes. One thing, if you're a brick and mortar business, you might want to slow down or even start to cut back on expansion, or you're reducing your physical footprints, right? And leverage more digital channels so that you can drive distribution at really low costs and save on energy costs, because your brick and mortar business is going to demand a lot of energy, right? Maybe it's also a time to reconsider hiring or stay on the sidelines a bit, or look at your business and see, do you need to hire? But also, because we expect a lot of some layoffs, as business is going to be more vulnerable in this season. And so you should expect some layoffs. You're already seeing that globally with Meta and Amazon, and whatnot. You can also be on the lookout for like great talents that will be let go by your competitors. But again, review your stance on hiring. Do you want to hire now, and what your approach would be, right? I think from that perspective, you can start to, and then one more thing for like corporates, or if you have like an entire value chain. So I use a Unilever, for instance, that have like distributors. While you're assessing your own business risk, you should also look at the risks of everyone in the value chain. So if you have distributors, look at what kind of risks that they will face, because that would directly impact their ability to, purchase from you, right? So each business, again, should, Jimmy had said, in corporate planning, look at different scenarios, look at the different risks that you face, look at the risks that the value chain faces and how that directly impacts you. And then also, definitely don't keep free cash idle. You must always sweat all your assets, including free cash. And obviously, you have to invest in a mutual fund, in a savings or investment account.
I suppose that also goes for individuals. This is not a time to hoard any cash right now. Most free cash should be invested. And we should be talking to Bonju or Moshood or Jimmy.
Or Rena at Z-Quest Investment Managers.
Moya, sorry, don't worry. We'll give you a chance to also tell us what you do and how they should come back to you. And I also think you should keep engaging in the chat box. There might be somebody who wants your number or your email, and drop all those nuggets. We invited you because we wanted to hear it, but we're restricted by time. But I'm hoping that you can still share some of those nuggets in the chat box, which is filled with questions for you guys. So we're going to be going to those questions. But before I do, in 30 seconds, I'll be starting with Moshood. 30 seconds only. Give me one thing that I should go away with. First, as an individual, and secondly, as somebody who is a director and sitting on a board, taking a decision for the company. This question is for everybody, but I'm starting with Moshood. 30 seconds, starting now.
Okay, thank you. I think the most important thing is to be proactive, forward-looking in terms of whatever, ability to scope.
Okay, I'm going to add more to your 30 seconds because I'm interrupting you now, but I'd like for everyone, when you are telling me, giving us your suggestions, start with saying for an individual, do X, for a company, do Y. So that, it helps us put in perspective. But if you think, your thoughts are, what you're going to share is something that we can do generally, you can just also say the same. So we're restarting the clock for you, 30 seconds, starting now.
Okay, I think everything starts with planning, and it ends with discipline and ability to see it through in terms of implementation of strategies. Most of the time, it's not the absence of knowing what to do, but ability to see it through and to also continue to evaluate, reevaluate till you are able to get through to the goal. For the corporate, I think most of what corporate should focus on is how, ahead of 2023, how they will be able to position themselves for opportunities and also have some safety nets in case if everything goes south. And for the individual, is also to have some sort of a financial discipline and to also ensure that in the course of doing this, there's also a lifeline for diversification of the revenue streams and some other safety nets that anytime anything happens, there is always an opportunity to bounce back and to continue to grow on that trajectory.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Rena, go. 30 seconds.
For individuals, I'd say this economic, the economy is cyclical, right? So you have recession and you have times of abundance. Don't make rash decisions. Don't panic, so you don't make rash decisions. So have a budget, stick with your budgets, and keep reviewing. And similarly for corporates, have a plan, right? But you can say this is all these different scenarios for 2023, but stay nimble and flexible and keep checking, keep reviewing, so that you know how to pivot, per time. Oh, you're muted, Adila. Right.
Yes, I realized. Thank you so much in 30 seconds. And Gonju, your turn. Clock starts now.
Okay, I think I touched on what the individuals can do in quite some detail, so I won't repeat myself. But for the corporates, I think this is, it's always an opportunity to be more innovative. So start looking at, how you can, as a corporate, start looking at how you can improve the distribution of your product through things like partnering, through things like creating efficiencies in how you do things already. Take advantage of, you will be surprised a lot of the systems and processes that you have that you're not fully utilizing, applications that you're not fully utilizing. So go back, fully start looking at what you have and start maximizing it, basically. And you'll find that you can be a lot more innovative in your delivery and also in your distribution of whatever it is that you're trying to sell. But I think trying to do any cost management that you're trying to do is going to be extremely difficult because prices are still rising. So without tapping into innovation, it's going to be very difficult.
Thank you. Jimmy, 30 seconds, go.
Okay. So for corporates, let's start with corporates. For corporates, the key takeaway should be going into 2023, think along scenarios. Think along scenarios. What that means is that have a scenario that says that if, for instance, if oil prices go up, what would we do? How do we respond? If diesel prices go up, what should we do? And as you think along scenarios, you would find out that whatever outcomes that play out, you're not up for a shock on any outcome because your scenario probably works out a plan along each outcome. Now, for individuals, I'll drop an action plan for you. Going into 2023, and not a New Year's resolution, make it a resolution at the end of this session. Sharpen your financial planning skills. Start budgeting. Immediately after this session, go on your phone, open a budget app, or go to your system, open an Excel sheet today. Even for the least, for the so-called dirty December, budget for it. For fun, budget for your fun. Today, just open that Excel sheet immediately after now and sharpen your financial planning skills. And then in the year, you'd find out that your financial literacy would improve. And then with time, you can sharpen your financial literacy as well. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Moyosore, you're on go.
Okay. I'll say for both corporate and individuals, this is the time to plan. Plan. And then, like has been mentioned, for individuals especially, you need to focus on your budgets. You need to be deliberate. This is the time to leverage on financial experts around you. If you have to join communities, investment clubs are generally available. They're a very number of them. You have the TGIC, and I'll drop a list of investment clubs that I know in the chat box. This now is the time to leverage on those people, and then you can then position better to invest. For corporates, think through your process, think through your expenses, and find areas where you can optimize your costs. So it's not just that you will cut down on costs, but also whatever you're spending, make the most of it, optimize your cost, and try to be as innovative as possible in cost reduction this period. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone. And I can assure you that we will come back to you again from time to time to ask you questions. And I know that there are a lot of questions already in the chat box, but I did promise Mr. Sunday Ademola that I will start with him. Mr. Sunday Ademola, you had raised your hand. Please feel free to unmute and ask your question in 30 seconds and 30 seconds only, so that we can go to the questions that have been left in the chat box. And thank you everyone for the contributions. I see them.
Thank you, Madam Madela. I actually want to ask the question what Mr. Jimmy was talking about, the impact of the dollars. The dollars is going to, maybe we are buying 700, going to 800, go to 1,000. It may not actually have impact on some of us that are not engaging in FSM products. But I want to ask that, can that be true for a country like Nigeria, where we are not producing? We export all those things we are buying in the market. Are they not exported? I mean, are we not importing them from overseas? People the clothes we are buying in the market, people import it perhaps from Dubai and the rest. And by the time they want to buy those clothes, they have to get the dollars at a higher price. And at the end of the day, we are using Naira to make a purchase, before the clothes we are buying for 100 Naira, because the dollar have increased, their own purchase amount also has also increased. So they transfer the price on us, the consumer, that we are making the final payment. And now we are buying what our naira can buy before. For example, 20,000 naira can buy a clothes, 4 years of clothes before. But now that dollars have increased, we are now buying in 40,000. Can we say that dollars didn't have effect on us? So we should know that since Nigeria is not a production nation, we are not producing. Even the fuel we are buying today, why everything is skyrocketing is because we are not producing it in Nigeria. We export it, and by the time we bring it back, we have to pay with higher dollars. And that's why everything is increasing. I want to believe that if there is an increase in dollars, it will definitely affect everybody, every citizen of this Nigeria, until we move from production, from consumer to production. So that's just
Mr.
my question now. Thank you. Yeah,
okay.
I'm with you.
So I suppose that question is to Moshood. Looks like you mentioned his name when you were answering
Mr.
it.
Jimmy.
But, oh, Mr. Jimmy. Okay. So please, Jimmy, your question.
Okay. So just to say a few things on the subject of FX. The subject of FX is like any other demand and supply issue, which means that if you spend 100 naira when you earn 20 naira, you would end up with a deficit of, if you spend 100 naira when you earn 80 naira, you'd end up with a deficit of 20 naira. And if you spend 100 naira when you earn 120 naira, then you would end up with a surplus of 20 naira. And if you spend 100 naira when you earn 100 naira, then you would end up with a balance of nil. It's also how it happens with FX and how it happens with our personal wallets. If you spend more than what you earn, then you would end up with a deficit. It's also the same thing with FX. So as a country first, we say to ourselves that how much FX do we earn and how much FX do we spend? Once there's a mismatch between these two, something is going to happen. If you spend more FX than you earn, then your country's currency will weaken because you're going to end up with and I'm trying not to be too advanced with the explanation. So you end up with a weak current account position. So I hear Nigerians say a lot that we do not produce, we do not produce, we import all we do. The figures are not entirely, the figures we have do not entirely assert to it that we import too much or we do not produce as a country. We do produce as a country, and that's why vis-a-vis other African countries, you'd see that manufacturing GDP to the total GDP is probably better than what most African countries have. And even when we look at our imports to our GDP, you'd probably see that we probably even under-import. So the problem then becomes maybe we do not export enough because our major export produce is crude oil, okay? And we do not do enough of non-oil exports, which is why I don't really against the Japa syndrome, because everybody who leaves Nigeria, that's a potential receipt tomorrow in terms of diaspora remittances. The Indians are the first country in the world to hit $100 billion in diaspora remittances. At best, Nigeria will do $25 billion, just a quarter of that. Yes, we know our population is nowhere close to them. So that's not a problem for us. Now, in terms of the numbers, again, looking at the hard numbers, I also do not subscribe to this 1,000 to 1 because if you were to crunch numbers on an Excel sheet using maybe methods like inflation rate differentials, you'd find out the Naira is nowhere near 1,000 to 1, which is why we've said that with the right policies, a Naira will trade at a better value. And which is why I said earlier that I wouldn't be speculating on the Naira if I were in your shoes. What do I need the Naira for today? Why do I need the dollar? If I have no business with the dollar, then I wouldn't be speculating with it. Because with the right policy actions, the speculators are in a likely position to lose. If you bought the dollar, for instance, at 850 naira, with where the dollar is today, you've lost. And if the dollar does not get back to that level, your losses will tarry for a while. And if the dollar doesn't get to this so-called 1,000, this proverbial 1,000, then your losses will even tarry even much longer than that. Okay? So are there pressures? Yes, they are pressures because we've not taken the right policy actions, which means that we have to allow rates harmonize between the official market and the parallel market. And when rates harmonize, what that means is that we could possibly see an appreciation in one market, most likely the parallel market, and see some level of depreciation in the official market. And then those rates harmonize. And when those rates harmonize, there'll be nowhere near all of these speculative rates we are currently seeing. Will that pass on some cost to us? Interesting views, because right now, most businesses probably already get their FX in the parallel markets. And if you were to go to a bank today to pitch, to bid for, let's say, $1,000 on your Form M to import, you probably only get $200 from them, which means the $800 will most likely come from the parallel market, which has already been priced into the rate of goods and services today in the open markets. So what that means is that if we harmonize rates, businesses will probably not even suffer more because they've already priced that into the current cost of doing business, which is reflecting on the cost of goods and the cost of services in the open market today.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's very, very insightful, and it's food for thought. I hope, it works out exactly as you said. I keep getting the chills from Moshood, or was it you that said nobody can really predict the future? Hopefully it works out as you've said. And there's a question that on the chat box, somebody's asking, what impact will the recent CBN withdrawal limits have on the economy? I'd like one of the ladies to please take this. What impact will the recent CBN withdrawal limits have on the economy?
I mean, I think it was already, I think it was Bonjo that already spoke to it. There is already a cashless policy in place, right? And this just fits like a glove into that policy, right? But what it helps us do is track, right? So there's a lot of transparency around movements of funds. And I think it was, yeah, so you can see the in and out of funds. Because at the end of the day, and I had a conversation, must have been earlier today or yesterday, why do we need so much cash, right? And I think that infrastructure-wise, I think we are already poised to manage a lot of these, digital transfers, if you like, whether it's through your bank apps or through USSD for those that don't have smartphones. You have mobile money operators, even in remote areas for those in remote areas, right? So I personally don't see to the general populace if there's going to be a negative impact. If anything, it will just drive more adoption of digital channels. It will drive transparency.
Thank you so much. I spotted another question here. And thank you, Moyo. Thank you, everyone that's been dropping links for us to join. Thank you. Somebody's asking, what is the right policy mix that will support an appreciation of the Naira? And that has been touched on. And so I'd just like us to answer that very quickly, and maybe in another 30 seconds so that we can get people out of here as soon as possible. Who would like to attempt that for us? Moshood, I think you started us out on this policy mix. Would you like to throw in your words on it?
Okay, thank you, Adiola. I think without repeating what many people have said, the intrinsic value of Naira is much, much better than what it is on the parallel. And I think what should drive the real value of Naira is the possibility of unification of the exchange rate. So if there is that will or the policy drive to unify the exchange rate, I think the element of speculation will be if not 100% eliminated, but will be reduced to next to nothing. Because if what you can get on the street, what you can get in the bank is what you're getting on the street, I see no reason why you also want to take additional risk of going to the streets to change the money. Also, what I also think that can also support the appreciation of the Naira is also coming from the structural policy, or what we can also regard as the other side of the policy, fiscal. Because like Jimmy has said, the volatility in the exchange rate is driven by the mismatch of the demand and supply. While we are talking about the demand, we also talk about the supply. The supply is when the economy needs a dollar and they're able to get it at the official window or the real window. So if we are able to get the oil production to the right level, either through the mix of providing the security for oil production and the reducing the oil theft, and also getting some of the leakages that reduces the oil revenue to the right level, I think it will also be good. Difference in incentive that SCBN and maybe federal government is also promoting to attract the remittances, foreign direct investment, which is very, very important. Not FPI, foreign portfolio investment. Foreign direct investment is actually what we need in the country. Attracting the foreign investors to come into the country, bring the money into the country. I think it will also promote a lot of stability in the Naira that we have. I think mix of all these policies, most especially from the monetary point of view, I think will go a long way to address the volatility and also contribute to the appreciation of Naira. Thank you.
Thank you, Moshood. Wasil Moradeo, if you promise me that you would ask that question in only 30 seconds, then yes, please, you can ask your question. After 30 seconds, I would be asking you to round it up. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, sorry, I missed the program along the line. So I just want one simple question in tune with the theme of this program. It's about this new cashless policy. You know, policy formulation and implementation are meant to better the economic variables of a nation. And could any of the moderators touch on possible impact of the new CBN cashless or cash withdrawal policy? Do we think it's something that could stimulate the micro and macro economy of the nation, or what that could stifle it? Micro in terms of personal and macro in terms of, business resources. Could anyone touch on it? What do we think is the impact?
Okay, that question was answered a few minutes ago also, but I also appreciate.
Maybe I missed it. At the time I was out.
Oh, sorry about that. But I know that the link has been shared to watch the program again. So if you don't mind, I'd ask that you please click on it and watch that part again. And also the part that you missed when the conversation started, if you don't mind. But I'd like to thank everybody. We've run completely out of time now. I'd like to thank all of my panelists. It's obvious it was not a mistake that we chose experts such as you, and from the experts who delivered the green news with a smile to those who give us a straight face. Thank you so much. You started a debate unwittingly that wasn't planned, and two debates actually, on whether some of our panelists hold the view that the Naira may depreciate further rather, to 1,000 to 1. Other panelists disagree. I guess, in 2023, we'll see who is right. And maybe we'll call all of you again and say, okay, so yes, prices go to X or Y. And of course, there was also the debate on whether the economy will go into a depression or whether it would experience any kind of growth. Having said this, we're also told we've gotten a very, very thought-provoking and something that will propel us forward, assignment from Jimmy, who said right now, and if you haven't done that already, right now, open your phone, open your laptops, open your desktop, open Excel, go right into it and start to plan. Plan for your 30th December. Plan for that. Apart from what Jimmy said and the assignments that he gave us, some of the things, strategies for growth for 2023 that the panelists shared is that we should plan, be disciplined with your financial spending, continue to evaluate and reevaluate your plan, be consistent and stick to your budget. Don't make rash decisions. When you have your budget, stick with it. Sharpen your financial planning skills. For corporate organizations, some of the strategies that we've been told, I forgot. Also, Moyo dropped some very nice links for us. Zinvest Money Club, Money WIT Club, as some links that we can go to. And for corporate organizations, think of safety nets, have a plan, do scenario planning, check, reevaluate, be nimble, be innovative, improve your product distribution lines, create efficiencies, fully utilize what you have and make sure you maximize it as part of cost saving. And then think through your process. You might find something in your process that you can improve that can help you have cost savings or maximizing efficiencies. And also, lastly, optimize your costs as much as possible. And we're also told to think about our borrowing again. Might want to change your borrowing strategy, knowing that interest rates are going to go up. And thank you very much for all of that. Think about your loans and remember that consumer demand is likely to go down. Explore your value chain again and see how you can create more efficiencies. Think about front loading your cost. That was so big. Think of how to front load your costs. If you have the cash, don't keep cash with you. Invest it and see what you can do. Slow down on physical expansions if you have to, and then reconsider hiring. If you don't have to, then maybe you shouldn't. And don't keep cash idle at all. I have so many nuggets here that I have personally and that I will definitely be sharing at our next management meeting. I'd like to thank you very much, Moshood, for your incisive contributions. Rena, thank you for your thought-provoking comments that you shared. Thank you so much. Bonjour, you left us with valuable nuggets, and I cannot thank you enough. Moyosore, you were simply amazing and extremely helpful with the things that you gave to us to do right away. And our headmaster, Jimmy, thank you for the assignments that you gave that would definitely help us, not just as individuals, but also our companies. I appreciate all of you. But I know that I'm not as eloquent as one of the directors of Kaizen Academy, Mrs. Bukola Olateru, and I'd invite her to come up stage now and then give the vote of thanks as we round up. It was very nice meeting all of you, and I'd like to thank everybody for listening. Bukola, over to you.
Thank you, Adiola. I think that was a lot of, impressive eloquence that we've had all day from you. Thank you. I have the privilege to give the vote of thanks at this very insightful and thought-provoking webinar. And I'd like to start by appreciating all the participants. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time to listen and send in comments and ask very interesting questions. And I'm sure it made the panelists have more thoughts on what they've shared this afternoon. I'll start by thanking Brenna, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Zinvest Limited. Brenna, thank you so much for being here, for sharing with us. Adiola did a lovely recap
Thank you.
of some of the things you had shared. Thank you. We very much appreciate you. Thank you for taking the time out. It's been about 2 hours. I'm sure that's a lot of time in your busy schedule. Thank you so much for being here. Permit me, I'm starting with the ladies. So I'll go on to Goju. Goju Fakeye, thank you very much. Let me state again that Goju is the VP Strategy and Transformation for FBN Quest Limited. Thank you, Goju, for being here this afternoon. Thank you for sharing with us. Thank you for the insightful comments and responses to our questions. We appreciate you for being here. Thank you so much. I'll also move on to Moyosore. Moyosore, thank you so much. I really want to appreciate you for being factual. Moyosore said she's one of those who supports the opinion that the dollar may get to 1K before the end of the year. That's a very realistic point of view, Moyosore. I hope that it doesn't get there. I hope, but facing the realities of that. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your responses. Thank you for answering our questions and for teaching us, and we're much more enlightened. Thank you so much, Moyosore. Moyosore is the Group Head, Financial Planning and Analysis for Tangerine Africa. Thank you, Moyo. Now to the gentlemen. I'll go to Mr. Moshood. Thank you, Moshood, for being here. Thank you for your responses, for your insightful and thought-provoking points that you've raised. Moshood is the Group Finance Director for Lotus Capital Limited. Moshood, really want to appreciate you for being here on behalf of the board of Kaizen. Say thank you. And then to the headmaster, like Adiola called him, Jimmy. Jimmy really proved himself to be the headmaster. I realized that Jimmy kept on explaining and re-explaining his points and going, further to give us such advice on investments and how to make sure that you're not in a deficit, or he actually even broke it down to say that if you earn 100 naira, you spend 100 naira at meal. So I'm sure that we have learned a lot today. Jimmy, want to appreciate you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time to explain and break down this point. Jimmy is the head of consulting for Augusto and Co Consulting, and he's in charge of research. And we could see that, in his responses while he was sharing with us. So thank you so much to all the panelists, and on behalf of the board of Kaizen Academy, I'd like to thank you all for being part of this session. And please, you can, as Diola had announced, you can get the link to this session on YouTube. The link has been shared in the chat. You can go back and listen again. There are more points, and there may be some things you missed, especially for the gentleman who said because of the network issue, he couldn't, he missed some points. You can please go back and listen in and gain one or more points to what you've already gained this afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for being part of this session. We appreciate you, and we look forward to you joining more of Kaizen Academy sessions. We're going to have more of this in the near future. So please, I'm sure if you found this insightful, you're sure that the next session will be much more insightful. Thank you, and have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Adiola, kudos to you. Well done. Beautiful moderation. We appreciate you as well. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Adiola.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Adiola.
Thank you.
Thank you for calling.
Bye.
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 Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Bye, Adiola. Bye.